A single mom was thrown out of her sister's wedding until a millionaire stood up for her. The salt air of Blue Harbor drifted through the cracked window of the small apartment, carrying the distant sound of gulls and boat horns. Evening light stretched across the floor, touching the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. Mara Jensen sat at the little table by the sink, her work apron still tied around her waist, petals of lilac and rose dusting her sleeves. She had just come home from Bloom & Tide, the small seaside flower shop where she arranged bouquets for tourists and summer weddings. It was supposed to be a quiet night until her phone buzzed with a notification. A digital wedding invitation glowed on the screen, framed in gold and blush pink. At first, she smiled faintly. The sender's name, Clara Jensen, brought back a swirl of emotions she hadn't felt in years. Her younger half-sister, same father, different worlds. The message beneath the elegant script said, "If you're free, come early to help with the floral setup. The resort will give you a vendor badge." There was no "would love to see you," no "it's been too long," only instructions. Mara read it again, the words flattening her chest like a stone. She hadn't expected an apology, but she hadn't expected this either. A request disguised as kindness. She looked around the apartment. Thin curtains, peeling paint, the soft hum of an old refrigerator, and then to the small figure sitting cross-legged on the carpet. 5-year-old Ellie was folding a piece of sky blue paper into a boat, tongue sticking out in concentration. "Mommy, look! It can float if we find water," she said proudly. Mara smiled, though her throat ached. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." She brushed a petal from Ellie's hair and tucked it behind her ear. "Can I take it to the beach wedding? You said weddings have big fountains." The question hung in the air. Mara hesitated. "Yes, maybe we can," she whispered, watching her daughter's excitement. She didn't have the heart to say what the invitation really meant. When she was younger, Clara had everything their father's money could buy. Private school, vacations, charm polished like crystal. Mara had left home at 19 when her father remarried and decided that 2 daughters under one roof would be inconvenient. Since then, life had been a cycle of small paychecks and quiet pride. She had never asked Clara for help. She had never even been invited to a family holiday. And now this, an invitation not to attend, but to work. Still, she couldn't refuse. That night, after Ellie fell asleep on the couch with her paper boat beside her, Mara sat at the table with the wedding invitation open again. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the phone screen. "Why go?" she asked herself. The answer came softly, like a tide against rock. Because Ellie deserves to see something beautiful. She deserves to believe family can still mean love. The next morning, Mara walked to the bus stop under a pale dawn. The sea mist clung to her hair, the strap of her floral kit digging into her shoulder. On the ride to the resort, she stared out at the ocean. The bus windows fogged as the sun broke through, turning the waves gold. She rehearsed what she would say if she saw Clara. "Thank you for inviting me. I'll help however you need." She told herself she could manage that. Polite, distant, invisible. At Bloom & Tide, her boss, Mrs. Graham, noticed the tension in her smile. "You don't have to go, dear. Let them hire someone else." Mara shook her head. "It's fine. It's just one day." She wrapped a bundle of ivory roses and slipped a ribbon into her bag. "These are for the head table," she said quietly. That evening, she ironed her light blue dress, one she had sewn from leftover fabric years ago. It wasn't fancy, but neat. Ellie helped pack her bag, dropping crayons and a small notebook inside. "For the kid corner," Mara said gently. "You can draw while Mommy works." Ellie nodded eagerly, her curls bouncing. "Will there be a princess, Mommy?" "Maybe," Mara smiled, fastening the child's hair clip shaped like a tiny seashell. "But you'll be the nicest one there." Later, after dinner, Mara looked at the bus schedule taped to the fridge. The first route to Azure Crest Resort left at 6:10 a.m. She placed the folded invitation beside it, its gold edges gleaming under the weak kitchen light. She wanted to believe that attending would bring closure, that maybe Clara had softened over the years. Yet deep down, she sensed the truth. The invitation wasn't a bridge. It was a reminder of distance. Before bed, she watched Ellie sleeping with the paper boat clutched in her hand. The window was open, and the night carried the scent of sea salt and jasmine. Mara whispered to herself, "Whatever happens tomorrow, she'll see a place filled with music and light. That's enough." She turned off the lamp, her heart steady but heavy. Outside, the ocean rolled endlessly toward the shore, waves glinting under the moonlight, just as steady, just as inevitable as the morning that awaited her. The next morning arrived with a silver dawn stretching over Blue Harbor. Seabirds circled the misty sky as the bus rumbled along the coastal road toward the resort. Mara sat near the window, holding Ellie's small hand in hers. The girl pressed her face against the glass, eyes wide with wonder at the endless ocean. "It looks like it goes forever," she whispered. "It does," Mara said softly. "Just like love should." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and for a moment she looked away, pretending to adjust her hair clip. They arrived at Azure Crest Resort, a sweeping property that stood high above the shoreline. White stone steps led up to glass doors glinting in the early light. Inside, everything smelled of salt, lemon polish, and luxury. Mara checked in at the staff desk, where a young woman handed her a lanyard marked "Vendor Helper, Floral Prep." "You'll assist the main florist on site," the woman said briskly. "Deliveries are in the side courtyard. Oh, and if you have your child with you, the kid corner is just past the lounge." Mara nodded quickly, grateful. She led Ellie to the kid area, a bright space with beanbags, coloring books, and a small TV playing cartoons. A few children of guests were already there. "Stay here, sweetheart," Mara said, kneeling beside her. "Draw something nice. I'll check on you soon." Ellie nodded solemnly and pulled out her crayons. "Can I draw the boats again?" "Yes," Mara smiled. "Draw all the boats you want." She smoothed her daughter's hair and kissed her forehead before walking toward the garden terrace. The morning air smelled of roses and sea breeze. Staff members hurried about, setting tables and adjusting decorations. The grand wedding arch faced the ocean, draped in silk ribbons that fluttered like pale wings. Mara slipped on her apron and joined the other florists, trimming stems and arranging bouquets in tall glass vases. Her hands moved automatically, practiced and precise, even as her stomach fluttered. She could see the main terrace from where she worked, where the ceremony would take place later that afternoon. A few hours passed in quiet rhythm, the snip of scissors, the rustle of leaves, the clinking of vases. When Mara paused to stretch her back, she noticed Clara for the first time that day. Her half-sister stepped out of the resort doors in a satin robe, her hair in large, perfect curls. Two bridesmaids trailed behind her, laughing softly. Clara's eyes flicked toward the floral team and landed on Mara. For a moment, she hesitated. Then her expression hardened. "You're early," she said, walking closer. Her tone was smooth, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Good. The sooner you finish, the sooner we can all breathe easier." Mara swallowed. "I'm almost done with the centerpieces," she said quietly. "They look beautiful," one of the other florists offered kindly, trying to break the tension. Clara didn't respond. She leaned closer to Mara instead, lowering her voice. "Just remember what we talked about. You're here to work, not to mingle." Mara nodded, keeping her eyes on the bouquet. "Understood." Clara's perfume lingered for a moment before she swept away, her laughter echoing down the terrace. Around noon, the sun burned through the clouds, lighting up the sea in brilliant blues. Mara wiped her forehead and took a small break near the side entrance, where she could see Ellie through the glass doors, bent over her notebook, coloring. The sight made her smile. "She's safe," she whispered to herself. Just then, a resort manager approached with a clipboard. "Excuse me, Ms. Jensen?" Mara turned. Yes? The bride requested extra floral arrangements inside the reception hall. Could you handle those personally? His tone was polite but firm, the kind of request that wasn't really optional. Of course, she said, gathering her tools. Inside, chandeliers glittered above linen-covered tables. The air conditioning sent a chill through her damp sleeves. She adjusted the ivory roses on the head table, double-checking each ribbon and petal. Guests were starting to trickle in for pre-ceremony refreshments. Mara kept her head down, trying not to draw attention. Near the door, she heard a child's laugh, Ellie's. Her heart skipped. The little girl had wandered in, clutching her drawing of a blue paper boat sailing on waves. She ran up, her cheeks glowing pink. "Mommy, I wanted to show her." She pointed to Clara, who had just entered the room surrounded by attendants. Mara froze. "Ellie, honey, wait. Too late." The room quieted slightly as the child approached the bride. "I made this for you," Ellie said shyly, holding out her paper. For a second, Clara looked stunned. Then she forced a polite smile. "Oh, thank you. But your mom is busy working right now, isn't she?" Her voice was light but edged. A few guests nearby exchanged glances. Mara hurried over, kneeling beside Ellie. "Sweetheart, let's give the nice lady space, okay?" she whispered. Ellie blinked, confused. "Did I do something wrong?" No, you didn't," Mara said quickly, forcing a smile. But Clara's bridesmaid chuckled under her breath. "Cute kid. Guess charm runs in the family." The words stung. Mara stood, took her daughter's hand, and gently led her out toward the lounge. She could feel eyes following her, whispers soft as wind. In the hallway, she crouched down to Ellie's level. "You did nothing wrong, baby. Your drawing is beautiful." Ellie nodded but looked down, small shoulders drooping. Mara smoothed her hair again, steadying herself. "Now go back to the kid room, okay? Mommy just has to finish one more bouquet." The girl hesitated, then hugged her tightly. "Okay." As Mara watched her walk away, a familiar ache filled her chest. A mix of love, shame, and determination. She turned back toward the glittering hall, the faint laughter of guests behind her, and whispered, "Just get through the day, that's all." By the time the sun reached its highest point, the ceremony terrace at Azure Crest shimmered with gold. Guests began arriving in waves, their laughter floating through the corridors like music. Inside the reception hall, the air was cool, perfumed with lilies and champagne. Mara kept her head down, rearranging flowers along the side tables. Every movement was careful and silent, her hands steady even as her heart thudded in her chest. She just wanted the day to pass quietly. The main florist gave her a nod of approval. "Looks perfect," he said, before heading off to another corner of the room. Mara exhaled slowly. Maybe, she thought, if she stayed invisible, no one would even notice her. But that fragile calm didn't last. As the band began playing soft jazz, Mara walked toward the far end of the hall to check the last centerpiece. Her reflection glimmered faintly in the polished silver trays. Behind her, the murmur of guests grew louder, clinking glasses, the rustle of dresses, the swell of conversation. And then, out of nowhere, she heard a woman's voice. "Excuse me, aren't you the bride's sister?" The words froze her. Mara turned slowly. An older guest with elegant pearls and curious eyes stood near her table. Mara opened her mouth to reply, but before she could, another voice cut in, sharp, bright, and painfully familiar. "She was," Clara said, gliding into view with a glass of champagne in hand. The crowd nearby turned toward her, smiling. "Now she's just helping out. You know, family pitching in and all." Her laugh rang too sweetly. A few guests exchanged glances. The older woman looked uncomfortable, but Clara didn't stop. "She's very good with flowers," she added, her tone wrapped in false warmth. "It's her specialty." The implication hung in the air. Someone chuckled, someone else whispered. Mara felt her cheeks burn. She nodded politely, forcing a faint smile. "Enjoy the evening," she murmured. and turned back to her tray. But the whispers followed. Is she really the sister? I heard she works at a shop downtown. Well, at least she's trying. Each phrase landed like a sting. She tried to focus on the arrangements, aligning stems, wiping glass rims, pretending she couldn't hear. Then, from the far side of the hall, a burst of laughter echoed, a sound she recognized immediately. Ellie. Mara's heart stopped. She looked up to see her daughter standing by the doorway, holding the blue paper boat high in her little hands. "Mommy! Look! She liked it!" she called out, voice bright and innocent. Guests turned to see the child in her simple yellow dress, curls bouncing as she skipped across the marble floor. Clara's expression tightened. She set down her champagne and walked forward, every step precise. "Ellie, isn't it?" she said softly, crouching to the child's height. "That's such a lovely drawing." For a brief second, Mara dared to hope her sister might show some kindness. But then Clara added, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Though it's not really the place for toys, sweetie. Weddings are for grown-ups, you understand." A few guests laughed. "Oh, how precious," someone said. "She brought her kid to work." Another voice joined in. "Guess she couldn't find a babysitter." The laughter swelled, mixing with the clatter of silverware and the hiss of whispers. Mara crossed the floor, heart hammering. "Ellie, come here," she said softly, crouching to gather her daughter in her arms. "It's okay, honey." Ellie looked up at her, confused. "Did I make trouble?" "No," Mara whispered. "You did nothing wrong." As she stood, she could feel every pair of eyes on her, the pitying, the judgmental, the curious. Clara folded her arms, feigning concern. "Really, Mara, maybe you should keep her in the lounge. She's distracting people." The word distracting sliced through the air like glass. Mara swallowed hard. "She was in the kid area," she managed to say. "She just wanted to give you her drawing." "Well," Clara replied lightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "She's given it, hasn't she?" Then, turning to her friends, she added with a smile, "Children are adorable, especially when they don't interrupt the program." The group chuckled again. Ellie's lower lip trembled. Mara's hands tightened protectively around her daughter. She looked toward the exit, wanting nothing more than to disappear. But before she could move, one of the older guests spoke up, a woman who had stayed quiet until now. "She's a lovely child," she said firmly, setting down her drink. And that was a lovely gesture. The tone was gentle, but carried weight. The laughter faltered. Clara's smile stiffened. For a brief moment, Mara met the woman's kind eyes and nodded gratefully. But the damage was done. The shame, the sting of humiliation that lingered like salt on a wound. She turned away, walking back toward the service corridor, holding Ellie close as the band started playing again. Outside the hall, the hum of the party faded. In the quieter staff hallway, Mara knelt down, smoothing the crumpled paper boat in her daughter's hand. "You did nothing wrong," she said again. "You were brave and kind." Ellie sniffled and leaned into her shoulder. "But they laughed," she whispered. "It's okay," Mara replied, her voice barely steady. "Sometimes people laugh because they don't understand. But you and me, we understand, don't we?" Ellie nodded slowly. Mara kissed her forehead, tucking the paper boat back into the little girl's pocket. Then she stood, straightened her apron, and whispered to herself, "Just finish the job. Keep your head high." She pushed open the door and walked back toward the glittering hall, the sound of the ocean faint but steady beyond the walls, like a reminder that dignity, once chosen, couldn't be taken away. The music inside the reception hall swelled louder as the afternoon light shifted to gold. Mara moved quickly between the tables, keeping her head down, trying to finish her work before anyone else could notice her. She could still feel the sting of the laughter, the way the whispers had followed her like shadows. Every sound seemed amplified, the clink of cutlery, the the scrape of chairs, the bright laughter that no longer sounded like joy. All she wanted now was to get Ellie and leave quietly. Through the glass doors, she could see the little girl again, back in the kid corner, coloring intently. Relief softened her shoulders. "Almost done," Mara murmured to herself. She adjusted the last bouquet on a dessert table, careful not to disturb the elegant layers of the wedding cake towering nearby. Then, in the span of a breath, everything unraveled. From across the hall came a sudden, startled cry, Ellie's. Mara looked up sharply. The child had wandered back inside, clutching her crayons. A waiter carrying a tray of glasses turned the corner at the same moment. Ellie froze in the middle of the aisle. "Ellie!" Mara called, stepping forward. But before she could reach her, one of the glasses slipped, water spilling in a glimmering arc across the floor, splashing the edge of the sound equipment beside the stage. The waiter gasped, trying to steady the tray, but the damage was done. Guests flinched as the manager shouted, "Stop! There's water near the wires!" He hurried forward, waving at the staff. In the commotion, Clara's voice cut through like a knife. "What happened? What did she do?" She looked down at the hem of her dress. Tiny droplets of water dotted the ivory fabric. Her face twisted in fury. "My gown! Do you see this?" Mara reached Ellie in 2 strides, kneeling down. "It's okay, baby. Don't move. The floor's wet." She pulled her daughter close, shielding her from the sharp voices rising around them. But Clara's words came next, cold and public. "Unbelievable! This is exactly why I didn't want her here." She gestured toward Mara, her voice shaking with outrage. "She brings her kid to my wedding, and now she's ruined it." The resort's floor manager, flustered, tried to intervene. "Please, Mrs. Reed, the bride, we just need to clear the area to clean it. For safety." "No," Clara snapped. "I want them out. Both of them. I'm not taking chances on anything else getting destroyed." Mara stood slowly, still holding Ellie. "It was an accident," she said quietly, but her voice trembled. "She didn't mean to." "Enough!" Clara interrupted. "You've done enough damage." She turned to the nearby security guards, who hesitated at the edge of the room. "Please escort them out. Now." The air went silent. Mara's pulse roared in her ears. One guard stepped closer. "Ma'am, if you could just come with us." "Please," she whispered, trying to reason with him. "We'll leave, but gently. She's frightened." Ellie clung tighter to her neck. "Mommy, what's happening?" "It's okay, sweetheart," Mara said, though her voice was breaking. Then Clara's mother-in-law, elegant, stern, spoke from a nearby table. "This is a wedding, not a daycare. Let them go. You can't fix class with pity." The sentence landed like a slap. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mara felt her knees weaken, but she stayed upright, refusing to let them see her fall. The guards reached for her arm to guide her toward the exit. She tried to steady herself, her grip tightening on Ellie. "Please don't touch us. We're leaving." But one of them, following orders too literally, caught her wrist to hurry her along. She stumbled against a chair, her elbow catching the edge. Pain shot through her arm. The sleeve of her blouse tore open, revealing a shallow cut already streaked with red. "Mommy!" Ellie screamed, her tiny voice piercing the hall. The sound silenced everything, the music, the murmurs, even Clara's tirade. Mara stood, trembling, clutching her daughter. Her hair had come loose, the once neat bun falling in strands around her face. She could feel her heartbeat in the wound, warm and insistent. No one moved. Then Clara hissed, "Get them out!" Her voice cracked, more from nerves than command. The guards opened the side doors. The warm light from outside spilled into the hall, making the marble floors gleam like glass. Mara took a slow breath and lifted her chin. Without another word, she walked forward, one arm holding Ellie, the other pressed to her bleeding elbow. The crowd parted automatically, some staring in silence, others turning away. As she crossed the threshold, she heard a few guests whisper again, some in pity, some in scorn. "Poor thing." She shouldn't have been here. What a mess. But Mara didn't look back. Her only focus was Ellie's sobs against her shoulder, the scent of salt and flowers mixing in the air, and the realization that this was the moment she would never forget. Outside, the sound of the ocean was clearer. The wind caught the torn edge of her sleeve, fluttering it like a flag. She stood on the stone steps, her daughter trembling in her arms. Behind them, the heavy doors of the hall creaked open again. Voices stirred inside, angry, startled, uncertain. And just as one of the guards reached to guide her down the stairs, a calm but commanding voice rang out from behind them, low and firm. "Do not touch her." Mara froze. The guards turned. The guests by the doorway shifted. Through the sunlight at the entrance, a tall man stepped forward, his shadow long across the marble. The silver edge of his cufflink caught the light as his voice came again, clearer this time. "Let her go." The murmurs inside stilled to a hush. Mara turned, breathless, her eyes wide with confusion. She had no idea yet that this single moment, the voice, the man, the interruption, was about to change everything. For a moment, no one breathed. The sound of the ocean faded beneath the stillness that followed the words, "Do not touch her." The guards froze mid-step, hands suspended in the air. Guests turned toward the doorway, drawn by the weight of that commanding voice. Through the sunlight, Elias Turner stepped into the hall, tall, composed, his gray suit catching the glint of the chandeliers. He moved with quiet authority, every step deliberate on the marble floor. Mara stood still, clutching Ellie against her chest. Her torn sleeve brushed against the child's curls, her arm streaked faintly with blood. She didn't recognize him at first. Only the steadiness in his eyes that looked at her as if they already knew her pain. The crowd parted instinctively as Elias approached, the murmur of his name rippling through the guests. "That's Elias Turner, the architect, the investor," someone whispered. "He funds the resort." The lead security guard straightened. "Sir, this isn't your concern." "It is," Elias said, voice calm but firm. "When a woman is treated like this under my roof, it becomes my concern." He stopped a few feet from Mara, his gaze softening. "Are you hurt?" Mara hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice trembled. Ellie peeked up from her shoulder, eyes wide and tearful. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. Kneeling slightly, he offered it to Mara. "May I?" She nodded, too stunned to refuse. He gently wrapped the cloth around her elbow, tightening it just enough to stop the bleeding. His movements were steady, practiced. "You shouldn't have been touched," he murmured quietly, more to himself than to her. Behind them, Clara's voice finally broke through the silence. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "This is my wedding, you can't just—" Elias turned to face her, straightening to his full height. His tone remained even, but each word carried sharp precision. "Yes, I can. You're hosting this event in a property funded by Turner & Co. Every vendor, every design element, every contract connected to this venue goes through my company. Which means," he added, his gaze steady, "when I walk in and see a mother being dragged out in front of a crowd, I have every right to intervene." Gasps rippled through the guests. Clara blinked rapidly, color draining from her face. "You're exaggerating," she said, trying to laugh. "It was just an accident." She overreacted. Elias's jaw tightened. "Was it an accident when your guest mocked her? When your staff grabbed her child? When you ordered her out because she didn't fit your picture of perfection?" He took a slow step closer, lowering his voice. "Tell me, Mrs. Reed, how many people have you humiliated today to make yourself feel bigger?" The hall fell into a heavy silence. Even the band had stopped playing. From the back of the room, a soft voice whispered, "She's the one who saved his son." Another guest nodded, remembering the online article about Elias Turner's near tragedy months ago, how his young boy had almost wandered into traffic outside a shopping plaza, and a stranger had pulled him back just in time. Elias turned toward Mara again. "Do you remember that day?" he asked gently. Her eyes widened. Your son?" "Yes," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "You told me not to thank you, that kindness should be normal. But you've just proven it's not as common as it should be." Clara's mother-in-law rose from her chair, flustered. "Mr. Turner, please, this is highly inappropriate." "What's inappropriate?" Elias interrupted, his voice slicing through the room. "Is that you let a mother be shamed in front of her child. I don't care about etiquette when dignity is at stake." He turned back to the guards. "You can leave. They're not the ones causing a disturbance." The men exchanged uneasy looks, then stepped back. Elias faced the guests next. "You all came here to celebrate love, so tell me, what kind of love drives people to laugh at kindness and reward cruelty?" No one answered. The silence was suffocating. Mara could feel tears burning behind her eyes, not from pain, but from something she hadn't felt in years. Someone standing up for her, without asking for anything in return. Clara tried again, her voice cracking. "This isn't fair. You don't even know her." Elias looked at her steadily. "You're wrong. I know her better than you think. I know she's the reason my son still believes the world is safe. And I know that if I ever have to choose between your version of fair and her version of good, I'll choose her every time." He turned to Mara then, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You don't have to stay here another minute. Let me take you somewhere safe." Mara hesitated, her pride warring with exhaustion. "You don't have to." "I know," he said gently, "but I want to." Ellie tugged at Mara's sleeve, whispering, "Mommy, can we go?" Mara nodded slowly. Elias offered his hand, not as a command, but as an invitation. She took it, trembling. Together, they walked toward the wide open doors, the murmurs behind them fading into silence. At the threshold, Gloria's sharp voice tried one last protest. "You're ruining everything." Elias glanced over his shoulder, calm and steady. "No," he said, "I'm saving the only thing that still matters." The bright coastal light spilled over them as they stepped outside. The breeze caught the edge of Mara's torn sleeve, and for the first time all day, the air didn't feel heavy, it felt free. Ellie rested her head against her mother's shoulder, and Mara, exhausted but unbroken, let herself breathe. Somewhere behind them, the music faltered again, as if the entire celebration had forgotten its rhythm. Elias looked toward the horizon, then down at Mara. "It's over now," he said softly. She met his gaze, uncertain, grateful, overwhelmed. Neither of them knew it yet. But this moment, the quiet after the storm, was only the beginning of everything that would follow. The doors of the ballroom swung closed behind them, muffling the chaos inside. For a brief moment, Mara stood in the courtyard, breathing in the salt-scented air. The breeze brushed against her face, cooling the sting on her cheeks. Beside her, Ellie clung tightly to her arm, still hiccuping from tears. Elias stood a few steps away, speaking quietly to one of the resort managers who had rushed out. His voice remained calm, but his eyes burned with anger barely restrained. "I want every staff member who handled this incident accounted for, and someone bring a first aid kit." The manager nodded nervously and hurried off. When Elias turned back, the fire in his eyes softened. "You're bleeding again," he said, kneeling beside Mara. She shook her head. "It's just a scratch." "Even scratches deserve care," he replied gently. His tone carried no pity, only quiet certainty. He took out another clean cloth from the kit a staff member handed him and wrapped it carefully around her arm. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," he interrupted softly. "You didn't deserve any of that." From behind the closed doors came faint voices, Clara's sharp tone, the rising murmur of guests. The tension inside hadn't settled. Elias straightened and took a breath. "I need to go back in there," he said. Mara's eyes widened. "Why?" "Because people like them never learn unless someone tells them the truth," he said simply. He looked at her and added, "You've already faced enough humiliation today, but if I go in there, it's not just for you. It's for every person who's ever been made to feel small." Before she could answer, the doors opened again. The resort's event coordinator stepped out nervously. "Mr. Turner, the guests are waiting. They're confused about what's happening." Elias nodded once. "Good. Let them listen." He extended a hand toward Mara. "Come with me." She hesitated. I can't go back in there." "You can," he said, voice low and certain. "You've done nothing wrong." Ellie tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, can we go home?" "Soon, baby," Mara murmured. Then she looked up at Elias. The steadiness in his eyes felt like an anchor. She took his hand. When they stepped back into the hall, the entire room fell silent. The chandeliers glimmered, casting a soft golden light over the guests who now watched with uneasy curiosity. Clara stood near the stage, pale and trembling, her groom beside her, lips pressed tight. Their father sat at one of the front tables, staring down at his hands. Elias released Mara's hand and walked toward the center of the room. "I owe everyone an explanation," he began, his voice carrying easily through the hush. "You've just witnessed something shameful, something that says more about our society than it does about one woman." He gestured toward Mara. "She came here today not as a guest, not even as a relative, but as a worker, because that was the only invitation she was given. And yet she came, with dignity, doing her job quietly, until humiliation found her." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elias continued, unwavering. "Months ago, this same woman saved my son. She saw a child in danger and didn't hesitate, even when no one else moved. She didn't know who I was. She didn't care about status or wealth. She just acted out of kindness." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And today, the world decided to treat her like she was less than human for that same humility." Mara felt her chest tighten. Every word struck deep. She wanted to tell him to stop, that it was too much, but she couldn't move. Elias turned to Clara next. "You say this is your special day, but tell me, what kind of wedding begins with cruelty? What vows mean anything if you can humiliate your own sister and call it pride?" Clara's eyes glistened with tears. "You don't understand." "No," Elias said quietly. "I understand perfectly. You wanted to prove you were better, but real grace doesn't come from the people who look perfect. It comes from the ones who keep standing after being broken." A hush filled the room. Somewhere near the back, a slow clap began. Hesitant at first, then joined by another, and another, until the entire hall echoed with applause. Clara's groom placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression grave. "He's right," he said softly. "This isn't who we should be." Clara lowered her face into her hands, sobbing. Elias turned back to Mara, his expression soft again. "You don't have to say anything," he told her, but she shook her head. "No," she whispered. "I do." She stepped forward slowly, still holding Ellie's hand. The crowd quieted. "My name is Mara Jensen," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "Some of you know me as the florist or the sister who doesn't belong. But I'm also a mother. And this little girl..." She looked down at Ellie, who squeezed her fingers. "She's not my shame. She's my pride." Tears glimmered on her lashes, but she didn't look away. "I don't want pity. I don't want charity. I just want respect, the same kind every person deserves. Because someday, when she's old enough to remember this day, I want her to remember that her mother didn't bow her head." For a moment, the room was still, utterly still. Then, as if a spell had been broken, people began to rise. First a few, then nearly everyone standing in quiet applause. The sound filled the hall, steady and real. Mara turned slightly toward Elias. He gave a small nod, pride shining in his eyes. She realized her hands weren't trembling anymore. Ellie's giggle broke the silence, bright and pure. The little girl clutched her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, everyone's clapping for you." Mara smiled through her tears. Maybe they're clapping for what's right. At the far table, her father stood. His lips moved, but the words caught in his throat. When he finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "I should have protected you," he said, eyes glistening. "I'm sorry." Mara looked at him for a long moment, then nodded gently. "So am I." And just like that, years of silence broke, not with anger, but with forgiveness. The night after the wedding felt impossibly still. The waves crashed softly below the cliffs of Azure Crest, their rhythm steady, patient, like the world was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. Mara sat on the balcony of the small guest cottage Elias had arranged for her and Ellie. The faint scent of lavender drifted from the garden below, mixing with the salty breeze. Through the open window, she could hear her daughter's light breathing as she slept, curled under a white blanket, her little blue paper boat resting on the bedside table. It was the first time in months that Ellie had fallen asleep without fear. Mara traced the rim of her teacup, the warmth soothing the ache in her wrist. Her sleeve had been replaced with one of Elias's bandages, wrapped neatly and tied with quiet care. She looked down at the gauze and exhaled slowly. Everything felt surreal. The applause, the apologies, the way the entire hall had turned from cruelty to compassion within minutes. She still wasn't sure how it had happened, or why Elias had stepped forward so fiercely for her. The door opened softly behind her. "Can't sleep either?" Elias's voice was low, calm. He stood in the doorway, no suit jacket now, only a white shirt rolled to the elbows, faint traces of exhaustion in his face. He held 2 mugs of tea. Mara smiled faintly. "You didn't have to do all this." "You said that yesterday," he replied, setting 1 mug down in front of her. "And I'll say the same thing I did then. I wanted to." He sat across from her, the chair creaking under his weight. For a long moment, neither spoke. The night hummed with quiet. The stars above reflected faintly on the sea. Finally, Mara broke the silence. "You risked a lot today. Your reputation, your company, everything. Why?" Elias leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "Because sometimes silence is worse than scandal. I've seen people lose their humanity behind polished walls. I won't be one of them." He paused, studying her. "And because I remember the woman who helped my son when no one else moved, I didn't forget." Mara looked away, embarrassed but touched. "I wasn't expecting anything back." "That's exactly why it mattered," he said softly. The quiet stretched again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. A few moths flitted near the light fixture. Somewhere in the distance, a buoy bell rang faintly in the harbor. Mara glanced toward the window where Ellie slept, then back at Elias. "She thinks you're some kind of hero," she said with a small laugh. "That makes 2 of us," he replied. Her cheeks flushed. "Please don't say that. I made a fool of myself back there." "You stood your ground," Elias corrected. "That's what people remember. Dignity is louder than shame when someone finally refuses to hide." He hesitated, then added, "The moment you said she was your pride, I don't think I've ever seen anything braver." Mara felt tears prick her eyes again. "You make it sound easy," she whispered. "It wasn't. I was terrified." "Courage always is," he said simply. A silence settled again, but now it was warm, filled with understanding. The wind stirred the curtains gently. Mara leaned back, exhaling. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Elias smiled, looking toward the horizon where the dark sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. "That depends on what you want, But I was thinking of starting something. A foundation maybe for single mothers who just need a place to start over. Training, housing, childcare support. He looked back at her. You've inspired more people than you realize, Mara. The video from the wedding, it's everywhere. People saw what happened. They saw you. Her mouth parted slightly. Video? Someone filmed your speech, Elias explained. It's gone viral. The mother who stood tall. That's what they're calling it. Mara pressed a hand to her heart, overwhelmed. I didn't want attention. You didn't seek it, he said. That's what makes it real. She stared out toward the sea again, blinking back tears. If even one person out there feels less alone because of it, she whispered, then maybe it was worth it. Elias stood and stepped beside her, his voice quieter now. It already is. He looked down at the sleeping figure inside the room. She's dreaming easy tonight. Mara smiled, her lips trembling, because for once she saw kindness win. The first rays of sunrise touched the horizon, washing the sky in pale gold. The garden below glowed softly, the dew glinting like tiny stars on the grass. Mara stood beside him, both of them watching in silence. The pain of the past hours hadn't vanished, but it had shifted, transformed into something steady and strong. Elias turned slightly toward her. There's one more thing, he said. From his pocket, he pulled out a small silver key on a ribbon. It's for the community center we're restoring near Blue Harbor. I'd like you to run the floral workshop there. You'd be the first name on the door. Mara looked at the key, then at him, speechless. Why me? Because people like you remind the rest of us what matters, he said. She closed her fingers around the key. Then I'll make it count, she whispered. I know you will, Elias said, smiling. From inside, Ellie stirred, her voice muffled but bright. Mommy, the sun's up? Mara turned, her eyes softening. It is, sweetheart. She looked back at Elias. Thank you for everything. As the light grew stronger, the sea reflected their silhouettes. A man, a woman, and a child standing in the golden morning after a storm. Mara brushed a tear from her cheek and smiled faintly. I think we're finally home, she whispered. And as the camera of dawn faded over the horizon, the story of a single mom who refused to bow her head ended not with pain, but with a beginning. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that kindness still changes everything.